Chiori will send your albedo straight into early retirement, and I will tell you how to build her best. Let's get into it. The Husk of Opulent Dreams is Chiori's best in slot set, even though it is only so by a microscopic margin. You get a 30% defense bonus from its 2-piece and another 24% defense from a 4-piece effect when it's fully stacked. On top, you get 24% geo damage bonus as well. So in terms of raw stats, you are absolutely golden with this set. And with Chiori's playstyle, you won't face any issues in keeping up the stack count, as she will constantly be dealing geo damage. If you play her in a sub-DPS role, she will even be able to get stacks from off-field. You definitely go for this set if you plan to play on-field Chiori, as the set bonuses support every source of her damage she can put out, while the other main options do not. But for everybody else who is not that dedicated to farm a terrible washed-up domain, she'll have a look at the next beautiful option, the Golden Troop. This set comes awfully close to Husk. In fact, it comes within 96% of the power level of it, which is huge. So if you're not a horrendously down bad for Chiori simp perfectionist, you can actually go and farm this set instead and save yourself some headache. The Golden Troop domain is just way more resin efficient to farm for you guys. Please save your sanity. And if you already have a cracked set, then you're cool. You done. As long as you use her as an off-field DPS, you will have zero issues making full use of its effects, which will add a nuclear 70% bonus damage to your skill, which in Chiori's case makes up more than 80% of her total damage. That tells us on top that her burst is nothing more than an afterthought with pretty animations. It should be no wonder at this point that Golden Troop can keep up with Husk as well. As you can see in the showcase of the Mono Geo team, the damage of both sets comes out pretty similarly. Now with that, we have already covered her best 2 artifact options, but if for some mystical reason you really want to play with an obvious signature set, you can go with Nighttime Whispers, but that set will be weaker than Golden Troop by 4%. And that's mainly because the 2-piece gives you attack percent and it's lackluster uptime for her, while Chiori's skill lasts for 17 seconds. And while Chiori does scale with attack too, it is just a flat out weaker stat for her than defense. The 50% geo damage you can get from the full set is of course good, but yeah, overall it makes sense that the set does fall behind the other 2 options. Just take note that you don't have to go out of your way to get that one when Troop is so brain dead easy to farm. Now, if you don't have any of the above sets farmed, or you're a very brave new player who is not scared to test the waters of Geo, you can go with 2-piece combos of attack percent, Geo damage percent, and defense percent. The best of these combos is 2-piece defense combined with 2-piece Geo damage, which makes sense as, like mentioned, attack percent ain't that hot on her. What's hot though is her energy requirements are low to non-existent depending on how you play her. In Mono Geo, or if the player is an on-fielder, her energy requirements go down to 110%. Even if you only play her in Duo Geo, you would only need about 140% ER. But here's the kicker. Even if you only burst every second rotation, you will be fine as her burst contributes less than 20% to your overall damage, so you don't really need to sweat about ER. In fact, I would personally stuff as much offensive stats as possible into her artifacts, and if she gets any ER, so be it. With that being said, Chiori has some choices with her main stats. With her timepiece, 9.9 out of 10 times she'll hit defense timepiece over an attack one. As I already mentioned in the artifact section, Chiori just scales way harder on defense compared to attack, even though she has some attack skillings in her kit. You would need a down bad atrocious defense timepiece to justify going for an attack piece instead, or you just don't own one. With the fact how generous the game is with handing out defense and HP, you should have something in your inventory. For the Goblet, most of the time you want it to be geo damage. If you don't get a lot of external damage bonuses, then this is your best bet. You could swap that out for Defense Goblet if your Chiori ends up being tied to her hip with Arena. Especially when you run other stuff too, like Golden Troop over Husk. And with your signature on top, you're sitting on a metric crap ton of damage bonuses. Then in this case, you should definitely try out defense over geo damage and see what gets you better results. Which leads us now straight to our weapon selections, as there are also a few things you need to take care of before you just run ahead and throw a Mist-Splitter on Chiori that was ripped from the cold hands of your now deceased Ayaka. Straightforward, her signature of Uraku Misuguri, regardless of playstyle, will always be the top dog for her. No discussion. It has a massive 88% crit damage substat, but in return comes with a lower base attack, which in her case, a mainly defense scaling unit, is not much of a compromise. It increases her skill by up to 48%, which is expected of her since that's her main source of damage. However, it also allocates some stats to your normals by giving them up to 32% damage bonus, which for most players won't be that useful if they give her the albedo treatment, which means swap in and out ASAP if you don't want to see her pretty face. Like, imagine you went for Golden Troop and now try to do damage to her Geo Infusion. Yeah, not gonna happen. We'll talk more about her infusion in the talent section. Now, if you do not own that signature because you lazy guys didn't look hard enough, you will have to make a decision. But seriously, not owning that weapon actually only means a 10 to 15% loss in damage with her next best options, which in my humble opinion is not too terrible.
I mean, it's alright.
You don't need that weapon unless you're really into its aesthetics and are absolutely desperate for it to fully min-max your waifu aspirations. That's all cool and dandy, but how free-to-play friendly her other options are is a whole nother story. If you want to on-field Chiori, Miss Splitter will give you the most bang. Just bang. There is nothing for your buck, only despair. And Wolfang and R5 being only slightly behind. Her top 3 non-signature options are all 5-star and Battle Pass weapons. To get an actual free option, you have to be around when they gave us the Bar of Spindle during that Among Us event where Albedo gave himself backshots. If there is anything that gives me actual anxiety in Genshin, it's not the pits of hell that is the spiral abyss of random BS mechanics, but this. Limited time events. What is so hard about making a shop where we can at least get older event weapons? If you didn't look hard enough, you will have to go all the way down to rank 9 on the on-fielder list to see a free-to-play weapon. We're talking about the 3-star weapon, the Harbinger of Dawn, which gets Chiori 17% down in damage compared to her signature. Honestly, 17% less damage is not a bad deal. For a 3-star weapon, it's really doing the Lord's work. However, it also absolutely forces you to play with Shielder if you want to on-field. So it can throw a wrench into your team building options if you want to buff the living hell out of your Chiori. Her other 4-star options, gotcha or not, are legit worse for her than a 3-star weapon. So either cope with the Harbinger or bite the bullet and prepare your credit card for some painful backshots. In short, on-field is kind of a luxury playstyle, which sucks. Now, if you want to play her with Navia, things actually look better. You still have horrible weapon options. I lied, it actually gets even worse. Remember the Harbinger of Dawn? It's even more unplayable with Navia compared to on-field Chiori. That's simple, because in that team with Navia and Chiori, Farina will also say, "Hello there," and tax you out of your HP and your other mortal possessions, which makes the Harbinger's uptime near 0. And since Bennett only gives like 1 or 2 ticks of healing, and also you need to be on field for said healing, that's not too great either. So she will never stay above the 90% HP threshold to keep the weapon going. Really sucks donkey balls. Because it kills her only good reliable free-to-play option outside of the Spindle and Festering Desire. The weapon drops all the way down to only 68% of the power level of her signature, which at this point you will absolutely notice. It's still better though than the 5-star R1 Summit Shaper, what the frick. With Harbinger being garbage tier, the Cinnabar, Spindle, and Festering Desire are your only hopes to save your dreams from being memes. If you own them, then you are one persistent sucker who survived not 1, 2, but 3 whole Genshin dramas and is still around to tell the tale. In the Navia comp, you would only be down by 70% in damage compared to your signature, which is lower than the on-field variant but still absolutely playable. But yeah, if you don't own them, then you're out of luck. All the other 4-star options are once again garbage except Wolfang. Playing Chiori with Navia seems to be considered a luxury by Hoyoverse, hence why her kit also can't be fully unlocked with her in DOGO. We'll get to that later. Note that in this comp, her best non-signature 5-star is not the Miss Splitter, but at least on paper, Farina's weapon is Splendor, and number 3, as is mentioned, the Battle Pass weapons are 5 Wolfang. I said on paper because seriously, when you have that Farina weapon, you're not going to put it on anyone else but Farina for Focalor's sake. It's 100 times out of 10 better on Farina herself than on Chiori. Duh. So forget about that. So the only real options you have without Spindle or Festering Desire is the Wolfang and the Page EC. If you own it, consider yourself really lucky, as it's a pretty good weapon not just for Chiori, and it's also only 70% behind in damage compared to your signature. For mono Geo teams with a main DPS like Ito or Ningguang, Wolfsfang will be your second best bet option. At this point, they really want us to bite the bullet and just go ham on the Battle Pass. But stay focused, brothers and sisters, don't get tempted. Cinnabar is the number 3 option, performing similar again compared to the other 2 teams. The rest looks more or less the same, only the Harbinger now performs normally again as Farina isn't there, so you have at least one actual free-to-play option that is not completely cope. So yeah, it's really a rough out there with weapons, especially when you want to pair her with Navia, but let's see who you can play Chiori with besides her. She definitely has more teams than you might think. In terms of teams you can play with Chiori, there's 3 different archetypes: Mono Geo, Duo Geo, and main DPS Chiori for the brave ones among you. Let's start with Mono Geo. The biggest winner is clearly Arataki Ito. So you have here, of course, the man himself, Chiori, Goro, and Zhongli. Chiori here can make full use of her kit, which means she gets to have 2 dolls deployed instead of 1 from her skill, which translates to a straight up 30% damage increase. That's because in order to max her power, she needs constructs on the field provided by other units. Ito's cow counts as a construct, and if he isn't there, and you also have Zhongli's pillar. On top of that, even though Chiori's energy demands are already low, you now have absolutely 0 energy issues. The team feels good to play, and you have a noticeable 20% team damage increase in using Chiori over Albedo. You can say with confidence that she was made to improve that team. You can say technically use her with Noelle too, but if you optimize to give Noelle the highest damage output, you end up with a team that looks like this: the Maid, Chiori, Goro, and Farina. If you're looking for an upgrade over Albedo, you will be disappointed. The only thing she does better here is her particle generation. She gives more particles and her puppets are indestructible, which means she's much more reliable as an energy generator. So if you have to decide for one of the 2, you will still always go with Chiori, but if you've already got a built Albedo, she won't be worth the switch. You also introduce 3 problems. 1 is that the Noelle team provides 0 constructs, which means that her damage will always be lacking. 2, Farina will make it impossible to stay above 90% HP all the time, even with Noelle, so Harbinger won't be good with either. The 3rd issue is that Chiori doesn't snapshot Goro's buffs, and since they run out pretty quickly, her damage will plummet after some time, which Albedo can hold for like 30 seconds of his snapshotting as long as this stupid flower doesn't break, which to be honest happens way more often to me than I am comfortable to disclose. So Chiori is sadly here only a side grade at best, and that's it. Only hardcore Noelle connoisseurs would consider getting her C1 to remove her restrictions. And that's already it for Mono Geo. We don't have a lot of choices here, and even Noelle with Farina is not a true Mono Geo team. You cannot spell Geo Duo Core without Navia. Okay, I lied, there's also Zhongli. Anyways, Navia is a nuclear rocket in your pocket. But as you already saw in the weapon section, you kinda have to will your way into making this work, so it doesn't feel somewhat cope. The full team is comprised of the girl, Navia, Bennett, and Farina. Chiori once again will make use here of her full potential, and that isn't enough salt in the wound, then she won't be making any good use of the Harbinger. She will play this team often with Farina, and Bennett for survival and big PP damage. Instead of Bennett, you can technically also play Plunge Navia with Xianyan if you're into that stuff. And genuinely, respectfully, it is not total cope. Don't get me wrong, Chiori will still at least do Albedo levels of damage, but you will always be reminded of what could have been when you look at that one lonely puppet on the field and be close to breaking down in tears. The Bennett variant with Farina always felt whack because of the half-butted healing he does, while Farina just sucks your whole team dry. But with the Geo Shield, you will be doing okay. It will be enough just to try. Another thing here is that Navia is a pure attack scaler, and Chiori prefers defense heavily. This makes Goro a terrible option unless you want your Navia to hit like a wet noodle. Chiori on the other hand just doesn't care either way, as she cannot snapshot buffs too. So it's just better to run Bennett. Now, there are a lot of other double Geo variants that I do want to briefly cover. They're okay, but to cope, to be frank. Hu Tao double Geo of Zhongli Core does exist, but it just replaces Albedo and replaces, for once, useful EM sharing with more DPS on Chiori's side. One way or the other, it's already a completely outdated team since double Hydro of Yolan and Farina completely slaps it. Yoimiya Chiori can be done as you replace Yunjin for Chiori as a sub DPS. The other members are Yolan and Zhongli. For the most, you will end up with a damage positive for the team, but note that when you use Chiori, that she cannot take advantage of Yolan's ramping damage buff, where Yunjin on the flip side gets her contribution buff through Yoimiya. But at best, you have here a side grade again of Chiori, especially when Yunjin is already C6. There are also other Chiori Zhongli double Geo variants of Xiao plus Jean, or Farazan if you're able to make it through all of Abyss without healing your Xiao, any Noivellette team, or Scaramouche plus Farazan. It's playable, but nothing groundbreaking. Another variant that is out of place is any type of double Hydro with the main DPS where you can tack Chiori on the end. This is not even double Geo anymore. This is just Chiori being a hunk of extra damage. No constructs, no healers, it's just forcing Chiori in for the sake of having Chiori. I don't recommend this type of team, but it's usable. Now to on-field Chiori. You can play Chiori as on-field main DPS in quotation marks, as her 5 seconds of glory on-field are almost as short than your average relationship. One simple team here is Chiori, Goro, Albedo, and Zhongli, but it will feel mid to play because of that short on-field time of hers. You're better off playing Ito or Noelle here as they both just dish out more. What I will mention is that at least Chiori's team rotations as a main DPS are shorter, so her DPS can end up being similar to Ito's, and Albedo can be substituted for someone like Yolan, so that is something. On top, for some reason, her Geo Infusion can be easily overridden by a Bennett C6, for example, which sucks even more donkey balls. In that case, she plays the same like any other meme team where you force Pyro Infusion on a character. In the case of Double Pyro where you play with Bennett and Xiangling, it will feel like your average quick swap team. There's also teams where you plunge of Xianyan in one of Geo or Vape varieties. But again, because of that short on-field time, you'll only ever get 3 to 4 plunges off and then you're left with nothing to do but fiddling your thumbs, so not recommendable. Now, since you've built your Chiori now, let's go over her talents so you can actually play her. Her normal attacks are pretty cool to look at, but aside from that doing nothing flashy on their own, the multipliers will only come into effect when you get her Geo Infusion, which I'll cover in a second. Her skill is the bread and butter of Chiori, the main meat of her kit. It lets her dash forward, and if you go into an aiming mode, you will teleport similarly to Kaching's skill. You can even swap out your teammates at the peak of her skill if you'd like. After the slash, Chiori will summon an automaton called Tomato, and if any Geo constructs are present, a second Tomato will appear, which increases the damage these puppets do by 30%. The damage is straight up doubled. The way they deal damage is similar to Albedo's Flower. They have a pretty wide range, but of course even those have limits. And it doesn't matter if you create the team constructs before you use her skill or after. The moment a construct is present, her second Tomato will appear. The tomatoes themselves don't count as constructs, so you're reliant on your team to get that extra damage. This is a certain limitation they put in place which, for better or for worse, let's be real, for worse, locks Chiori into Ito teams or Mono Geo teams in general, unless you get her C1, which I'm gonna cover soon. Now, coordinated attacks are only one of 2 actions you can do. You can get it for hitting the skill button a second time, but if you instead want to do a normal attack, you will switch her to Geo Infusion mode, which as the word says, infuses her normals of Geo damage. If you do that, you will have coordinated attacks that supports her team. This choice will be unlocked when she gets her A1. Her burst is a very simple nuke where she forms her twin blades into a scissor. Nothing special, just a bit of extra damage. In Mono Geo, you won't need any additional ER to burst off cooldown, and at max in Double Geo, it's 140 ER, but often you will just be better off bursting every second rotation instead of chasing ER in her substats. Her A4 will add a little bit of Geo damage to her kit whenever a teammate creates a construct. It's helpful, but not that huge. Talent priorities are simple. Chiori's skill is the main meat of her kit, so make sure you level it first. Her burst also does a solid amount of DPS, so level it up as well. You can ignore her normals, but if you want to use them, then you can level them too, but don't focus on them. As for her Constellations, her C1 is controversial. It has 50% more range to the tomatoes, which is nice. But the crazy part is that you partially have the Geo restriction removed, as you get a second tomato without asking for any constructs. It made the restriction a little less strict, and I call it the Navia Luxury Con. It's only there so you can unlock this potential in player of Navia, that's all. For Ito, it adds basically nothing new, no extra damage. C2 adds a simplified automaton that attacks nearby enemies every 3 seconds for 170% of the original puppet damage. That will actually increase Chiori's damage by a significant amount. It's her strongest constellation, and while I don't have advice to go for her crowns, this would be the best point to stop. Her C3 will add 3 more levels to your skill. It's good that the skill gets buffed first here as it's her main source of damage, but that's it. This con is alright, add some extra damage from Chiori's end. You'll get an extra doll after triggering her A1. Not a tomato, but rather a Kinu. It's the same doll that you get from her C2. It'll do coordinated attacks with your active character. It's an alright con. Some more damage to her burst is not bad. Extra DPS is always nice, but her burst isn't a big deal. This'll turn Chiori into more of an on-field Geo DPS. There's far better on-field DPS you can get at C6 in my opinion, Farina being a prime example. Or Navia if you want a Geo comparison. Not the best C6 on the market, but it'll serve Chiori fine, Geo normals for days. Chiori is a bit disappointing. It's a shame that Hoyo couldn't release a Geo support which buffs damage instead of adds damage. We were looking for an enhancer of the base kits of Navia and Ito. but she is still strong enough to be best in slot within Mono Geo and has a beautiful design to boot. I recommend her for all the Arataki enjoyers out there, but if you're a Navia or Noelle main, measure your hopes, she's not going to be crazy for you guys. Hopefully this video was able to get your Chiori weaving cuts of fury upon her enemies. Well then, this has been Juice, signing out. And wait, I forgot one more thing. Chiori has a hidden A6 passive called Screw Customer Service, where she eats bad customers into the 4th dimension. Thought it was worth mentioning.